Good morning. This is the Monday, June 8th meeting of the Railroad Transportation Safety District. My name is Deb Shore, representing Lancaster County. I'm currently serving as chair. To my far left, we have a new member joining us, representing the Lincoln City Council, Cindy Lamb. She will be participating in the meeting today, but unable to cast a vote due to the fact that the City Council hasn't taken final action on committee assignments. So we welcome you here.
Thank you.
Vice Chair of the RTSD is Roy Christensen from the City Council to my left, and to my right, also from the County Board, Larry Hutkins, and Larry Ann Gaylord-Baird representing the City Council. We have reason to believe that Bill Avery will be joining us shortly, also from the Lancaster County Board. To begin the meeting, I want to announce that the Open Meetings Act is posted at the rear of the hearing room. And before we begin the actual meeting, I want to take a moment to recognize Tina Queen. Tina, if you'd come forward at this time, and Roger as well. Tina has served as our RTSD administrative assistant for over 15 years. And those of you who sit up here, you know the actual work is done down there and upstairs and at the Municipal Services Center and everywhere that the actual work occurs to make us look good on meeting day. So I want to take a moment to thank you for the years we've worked together and for on behalf of all the other board members that you have served with. Roger?
And from my standpoint, Tina was always 3 steps ahead of me. She scheduled all my travel to go to the national committee that the RTSD supports. She thinks ahead. She's always reminding me at least a month before I need to get things done, and then she keeps reminding me as we get closer and closer. But, you know, and she was very good at finding things, the records, getting things out to you guys, very flexible as we've gone to more electronic and some of those kind of things. And clearly, she will be missed. There aren't an awful lot of opportunities for advancement and promotion for a lot of our administrative staff, and sometimes I think they are forced to look at other opportunities. Tina's not leaving Public Works and Utilities. She's going up to the Water Business Office and will be counting dollars and cents and taking care of accounts up there. But certainly will be missed, and as a small token of our appreciation, this just says, presented to Tina Queen in grateful appreciation for 15 years of service to the Railroad Transportation Safety District, signed by Deb Shore, RTSD Board Chair, and Roger Feigert, RTSD Executive Director. And it's got the City of Lincoln, RTSD, and the Lancaster County logo on it. And I do want you to note my signature is in purple pen. So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure working for all of you over the years, and I've really enjoyed and learned a lot of new things since I've been the secretary for this board, and I am truly going to miss doing this job and taking care of Roger.
Which is a full-time job in itself. So,
Thank you.
And we are thrilled that you're continuing with public service.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Roger.
Okay. And if I could take a moment of personal privilege with joyous celebrations and thanking those who serve with us, we take time to thank those who are no longer with us. And if you would just give me a moment, I'd like to recognize Harlan Layton. He passed away on May 14th, 2015 at the age of 87. Harlan was a longtime supporter and volunteer advisor to the RTSD and an expert on all things railroad. He was originally from Iowa and served in the Army from September 1946 to January 1948. He retired from BNSF Railroad in 1995 after almost 30 years of service. He was a member of the American Legion Post 3, VFW Post 131, and the BNSF Veterans Association. Former City Councilman Doug Emery said Harlan was a longtime personal friend and an active member of the Northeast Lincoln community. He was a regular attendee at RTSD meetings, and his career working for the railroad allowed him to present a different perspective to the RTSD board members. Roger Feigert, RTSD Executive Director, commented Harlan had the greatest respect for safety concerns created by mixing pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists with trains. The train wins every time, Harlan would remind us over and over. He always had good suggestions and ideas for the RTSD board to consider and our mission to promote safety and reduce conflicts. Speaking for myself, I was always impressed with Harlan's near encyclopedic knowledge of every one of the hundreds of railroad crossings in Lancaster County. He could tell you the layout of each crossing, the number of trains and cars per day, where maintenance was needed, and areas of safety concern. I was grateful for his attendance at so many meetings over the years and his passion for the railroads. Harlan and his wife Jeannie, who preceded him, were Lincoln benefactors, supporting scholarships for high school students in his hometown of Mart Air and also for Lincoln Public Schools. They supported many nonprofit agencies in our community, including the People's City Mission, Matt Talbot, Food Bank of Lincoln, Cedars Youth Services, and the Malone Center. We extend our sympathy to his family and our gratitude for his support all these years. He will be missed. Thank you.
Here, here.
All right, moving on. Item 1, approval of the minutes. They were previously emailed to you. Are there any comments, corrections, or questions?
I would move approval as printed and presented.
Second.
Motion by Hutkins, seconded by Gaylor Baird. Amy, if you call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
He's absent yet. We just got word that he
Yes.
is on his way.
and, oh, yeah, sorry, Hutkins.
Yes.
Motion carries. Item number 2, statement of receipts and disbursements. Liz.
Good morning. I'm Liz Thanel from the Lancaster County Budget and Fiscal Office. You have your fund level statement, which tells your financial activities year to date. Your fiscal year ends in a month, so you have almost all of your tax revenues compared to budget. You have receipted almost everything. You're at 99.4% of taxes receipted. I did look at May's, and that puts you just over 100%. I think once you collect June taxes, you will be right at $2.8 million. So it'll be about $60,000 over what we budgeted for the year. Your investment interest income, you're going to be about, you'll be at about less than $40,000 for a fiscal year end. Just tax rates have, or interest rates have not been what we'd hoped. So I always budget a little optimistically there, and we didn't meet that budget. For disbursements, you are on track for commissions. Your operating costs are about 75% of budget, and your construction costs right now are a little less than $1 million. So your ending cash balance is $658,000 with investments of $13.4 million. And at the bottom of the report are all the various investments that are currently being held for you over at the County Treasurer's Office. When I sent this report out, I did not print off the budget estimate that I have projected for next fiscal year. The fiscal year that starts in July runs through next June. Right at this point, I am guessing that your tax revenues, we would budget at $2.85 million. I think we could even bump that a little bit higher. We're looking at a major valuation change this year, and so I think that your revenues will go up even at the 1.3 cent levy. Your interest income, I would drop that from $50,000 to $40,000 budget for the year. So that budget would be at $2.89 million revenue for fiscal year 15-16. And the expenditure budget, Roger will be reporting on later in the meeting.
2.859. Do you know what percentage increase that is that you calculated?
It's about, well, I calculated at a 5% valuation increase, but keep in mind only half of that valuation increase gets collected
For this year.
next fiscal year. So it's more like 3%, that 2.89.
Questions, Larry?
And I think your projections on 5% are kind of in the realm. I know the Lincoln Public Schools is playing on 5.2%, so I think that, of course, we won't know until the Board of Equalization finishes up on that, exactly what that's going to be.
Rather be low than high.
Other questions? If not, we'll entertain a motion to accept the statement of receipts and disbursements.
Move approval of this statement of receipts and disbursements.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird, Hudkins.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on, item number 3, current budget status, project updates, and committee updates.
There's going to be a number of handouts, so I'll do that. My mother and father taught me not to wear a hat in the house, but today I would like, in honor of Harlan, to wear this cap today. I will really miss that guy. So, current budget status, as we're almost, probably the last handout in your current packet is 2 pages. The front page is the operating and capital budget. The page attached to that is the CIP. But what I really want you to do is just look at that last handout, and we'll just quickly go down through kind of where we are at the present time. We've only spent about $67,000 of the operating budget, so of the $90,000. There'll be some additional charges for Amy, Tina, and my time as we get closer to the end, but we're well under our operating budget. Railroad crossings, the next group down below, capital projects. We really haven't received any expenses from anybody. We should be paying out the trail crossing at Park Boulevard. Trails, the Parks Department's got a new trail down there. It comes across Park Boulevard between Van Dorn and over to South Street. And that's up and running. It took us a while to get the actual bill from them. That'll get paid out. I think probably within the construction projects, the only thing I really wanted to highlight was Hickman. Quiet zone had gotten slowed down a little bit. Railroad had come in early May, the end of April, and started setting some new crossing panels on 2nd Street. I think with the flooding and the water, some of that rock and ballast got washed out, and the railroad has been diligently working in other parts of southern part of the county trying to take care of some flooding issues. So they need to come back and continue to work on getting those crossing panels in so they can continue the work on the quiet zone. The other one was a quick update on Southwest 40th. Southwest 40th, all of the piers and footings are in, all of the girders are set. After they set the girders on top of all the piers, they have to concrete between those in underneath. Those are called the webs. There's only just a couple of those left to do. They're installing the metal decking on. So with the metal decking on, they'll be able to start setting steel and start pouring the deck. So setting steel, pouring the deck, and doing the road paving both to the north between the 2 bridges. The Middle Creek Bridge is virtually done, and then some asphalt paving on the south side. That's yet to be done. All of that still anticipated to be done by mid-October. So that's kind of the original date of where we were. So the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, that meeting is in San Antonio next week. Nothing more exciting than going to the middle of Texas in the middle of the summer, but we go down and work on that. Again, I thank the board for their support in that travel. At that point, I don't really have any other project updates, but would offer to answer any questions you'd have about the current budget, where we are, or any other project activity.
Any questions? All right. Seeing none, we will move on to item 4, election of officers.
I will nominate Deb Shore as chair.
I would second that nomination.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This is a committee assignment I certainly enjoy and have become very passionate about. It would be my honor and privilege to serve another year. Is there a nomination for vice chair?
Nominate Roy Christensen.
I would second that nomination.
Thank you. I'm pleased to accept.
We have two motions and 2 seconds. I guess I should have called the roll on those separately. So if we could backtrack for a moment, we will call the roll on the motion for election as chair. I will abstain on that.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Gilbert,
Yes.
Hudson.
Yes.
And now on the motion to have Roy Christensen serve as vice chair in the coming year. Call the roll, please.
Shore,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Gilbert,
Yes.
Hudson.
Yes.
Christensen?
No, I've been
You-
staying on
you're-
mine too
okay,
as well.
okay.
Follow your example there. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Item 5. Yes. Oh, great. I messed up already.
Bill Cudlip,
Yes.
Crosby Gunzel Law Firm. We also need to elect a secretary.
That's true.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Lest anyone worry about the hardship, being secretary really doesn't take much of anything. Amy and I, or Tina and I in the past, would put all the paperwork together. There might be a signature required on the budget form, so it's not too onerous. And I've tried.
Larry?
I would like to ask Larian if she would be willing to perform that duty.
I was just doing that.
Would you like to second that motion then?
Yes, I will.
All right.
Well, she didn't answer yet.
You're being railroaded, and how appropriate right here, right?
I feel that way.
You have the assurances that they do the heavy lifting, but we've got to have an official signature.
All right, I can sign my name.
Okay. Call the roll, please.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Hudson.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. I thank you, Bill, for catching that oversight. Now on to number 5.
Thank you, Bill.
Two separate items on the agenda probably should be addressed separately. The first one is renew of our legal services. Bill Kudelek is here. I would like to say and remind myself as well as everyone, I believe life is about relationships, and relationships are about trust and faith in working with people. Clearly, the Crosby Gunzel Law Firm were instrumental in drafting the initial legislation that created the ability to have a railroad transportation safety district. They've done very well. I feel like I can trust them. I can get them to, at any moment, any time. They regularly there. Bill doesn't always agree with me, which is probably a good thing. But I think having that independent voice and check over both the county attorney's office and the city attorney's office has served the district very well. It's a fairly Spartan budget when you really think about it, and Bill will talk a little bit about those services. There is a retainer for coming to the meetings, and then everything else really, as I call Bill and ask for help or research or reviewing documents, then is charged on an hourly basis. Which he will tell you, and I agree, haven't been raised for quite a while. So maybe next year we might want to rethink that situation. So,
My pleasure to be here. Bill Cudlip, Crosby Gunzel Law Firm. As Roger said, we've had the privilege of representing the RTSD for many years, and my privilege as well. In the materials that you have are the proposed contract through June of 2016. It's the same contract, the same terms that we've used for many years. The rates are the same for the initial retainer that pays for 4 quarterly meetings of the board, and then anything above that are at the rates identified in the contract. Those rates haven't changed in the last, I went back and looked, 6 years. And we're happy to continue on the same terms at this point, but at some point in time, it may make some sense to look at a cost of living adjustment, but not here today. Out-of-pockets are the same. It's terminable basically at any time, although the provision does say that 30 days notice. So if I guess hypothetically, if our firm wanted to terminate it and there was an upcoming board meeting within 30 days, we'd still be obligated to do that before. At any rate, I've had the privilege of working with Roger for years now, and we get along just fine, I believe. Again, we don't always agree, but I think that I enjoy working with him and the board and would like to continue that if you will have us.
Questions for Bill? Bill?
When you don't agree, how do you resolve your differences?
That's a good question. We have brought in Ms. Shore on occasion.
The sheriff?
And Roger, sometimes he'll heed my advice. I don't know. I give him my advice. I give it in writing, and then I move on.
I would say we follow Bill's advice the majority of the time. Larry?
I would move that we renew our contract with Crosby Gunzel. You've performed admirably for many, many years, and you just proved your worth this morning when we forgot to elect a secretary. So.
Could I just ask one staff question before we do the motion? Is that
Sure.
all right? Roger, could I just ask you a quick question? The not to exceed amount for the contract goes up just a bit this year. Is that in line? Does it go up every year? Is that a standard?
That's in the next contract for
it
the
is.
accounting
This
services.
The accounting, sorry.
This one doesn't have that maximum to exceed.
Okay, thank you.
I'll
And
second.
then I guess just for clarification, usually it's not, I totally lost my train of thought. I heed his advice. Usually it's not that I don't agree with him. Quite often I don't understand some of the legalities, and certainly try to follow that advice.
So we have a motion from Larry and a second from Roy, and I appreciate when you have a contract from an attorney that is only 2 pages long. I find that most impressive.
That is nice.
Simple agreement that we've used for many years.
Call the roll, please.
I don't know.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird, yes, Hudson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next item on the agenda is the accounting auditing contracts. Kurt Mesick is here, now of Becker Mayer Love, previously of Mesick and Crouch. I would have the same comments about working with Kurt over the years. And engineers may know math, but I don't think we know accounting and auditing, and we certainly need help in that area. And this would be the contract that actually shows a not to exceed amount to go up $200, I think from $10,300 to $10,500, and I will also address that in the proposed upcoming budget when we get to that point there as well. So again, it's not just doing the budget, and he does an audit and those other things. So at that, I'll turn it over to Kurt and say thank you.
As indicated, the engagement does include the budget process as well as the auditing process. Just some history regarding me. I'm a director now with HBE Becker Meyer Love. Before that, I was in partnership with Jan Crouch with Mesick and Crouch, and all of the auditing work has been transferred over with HBE Becker Meyer Love, but I still serve with them, and my choice of going to HBE Becker Meyer Love was based on integrity, and I really looked at that as being the major reason for me to merge that practice. So my personal involvement is going to be to eventually be out of the auditing venue for a while. And again, Tony Gerina, who's been working with this audit, has continued to, he went over with us as well. So he's experienced with the RTSD as I have been, so.
Well, we would invite you to bring him to a future meeting, so we'd have a opportunity to meet him. We hope you're with us for many years, but understand that at some point it's time to turn things over.
Point of reference, I've been associated with the RTSD since 1978. So.
Wonderful. All right, is there a motion to accept the auditing and accounting contract as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any additional discussion? Call the roll, please.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird, yes, Hudson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item number 6, engineering study for 33rd, 35th, and Adams.
Before we start, and I call up the two principals of the engineering firm that was selected, I thought maybe I ought to step back for just a second and talk a little bit about the process of how we got from where we are to where we are here today. The RTSD has carried a potential study project for the goal of closing the Adams and the 33rd, 35th and Adams at-grade railroad crossings for quite a while now. Moving ahead slowly. In 2013, in April, we had a large scoping meeting which over 500 businesses were invited to just talk about the goals of closing those crossings and what it might take to do that. I had really hoped that we would move ahead much quicker than that, but we are finally at a point where I'm convinced these two crossings have the highest risk factor in the state of Nebraska when it comes to conflicts between cars, bicycles, pedestrians, and trains. We have Nebraska Department of Roads on board saying that they agree this is a high priority type project. So some folks might say, well, you studied all that when you did Antelope Valley. We live in a day and age where we need to make sure that we use all the funds available to us anywhere, and our goal in this project all along is to make it federal aid eligible for high hazard safety funds from the federal government, so we need to make sure we're following process. The Antelope Valley environmental document was probably signed in either 2001 or 2002. Most environmental documents are good for 3 to 5 years and then either have to be updated or redone. We will not lose the value of the work and the effort that was done both for that as well as any other work the city has done with the NRD and the Corps of Engineers out in that area. But to move forward and determine whether or not there really is a feasible project and something that this board and this community should embrace, you do need to go through that, some preliminary planning, engineering, looking at alternatives, looking at the environmental impacts, both positive and negative, to what's going on out there without any improvements. And certainly all of that anymore takes a significant outreach to the public. What do they want? What do they know? We need to include them in that process. So the RTSD undertook its own process, which quite often follows the City of Lincoln engineering. We're here today to really validate the procurement of professional services through the qualification-based process. And in that process, a selection committee was named. That included the Director of Public Works and Utilities, Deb Shore, the board chair, Chris Humphrey, and I should also remind everybody, the City of Lincoln Public Works and Utilities Engineering Department provides the engineering support for the RTSD at an administrative level. The RTSD doesn't have its own engineers, and so they can provide that support without duplication of effort. So from within the city, Lonnie Birkland, who is our new city traffic engineer, comes with tremendous ideas on how to deal with traffic and intersections and helping folks be safe. Chris Humphrey to serve as the RC, which is the responsible charge person certified by the state to be able to receive and make sure that we stay on track for federal funds. And myself, actually serving in a dual role, Executive Director of the RTSD. And I do remind everybody this is an RTSD project. This is not a City of Lincoln or a Lancaster County project. It is really meets the priority and needs of the RTSD. We went through a selection process. We put out a request for proposal. I believe we had 5 proposals that came in. The committee reviewed those, met, talked. We shortlisted those down to 2 firms, and it takes a lot of time and effort and cost on the consulting community to put together that information. And we felt those 2 firms best suited the purposes and need and moving ahead, so we interviewed them. That committee, again, based on qualifications in the interview and thinking about what they thought was best for the community, selected the firm of the Schimmer Associates with FHU, Felsberg, Holt, and Ullevig. There's a couple of other smaller firms. Mark Lujaharms from the Schimmer Associates is here and serves as the primary lead, and Kyle Anderson from FHU is here, and they're going to come up and speak. After that shortlisting and the selection was made, then the next step, which I think is often misunderstood in the community, is you need to sit down with your proposed consultant and talk about what is it that we want them to do, and that's called scoping. And that same group plus Roy Christensen as vice chair joined us. So Deb, Roy, Mickey, actually Mickey stepped out, and then Lonnie, myself, and Chris sat down in a period of a couple weeks, developed the list of things that we thought need to be studied, analyzed, and the work that needs to be done. And once you kind of agree on that scope, then basically you can turn around and you can cost that out based on the level of efforts. We talked about everything from how many alternatives do we look at to how many meetings are there going to be in the public involvement. That then in turn generates a fee schedule to do that work. And when we got the first feedback, we said, do we really need to do all that? And we turned around and went back through it a couple of times and talked about more meetings, less meetings. The one thing I'll always say is we always end up with more meetings at the end when you finally get through the process than you thought you would. And we arrived at that scope, and the contract that is before you today, and again, I don't want to go too far. I want Mark to come up and talk a little bit about what they're going to do. But before he does that, I would tell you, stand here as part of that selection and negotiation committee, saying that that committee believed this was the most qualified team for this project, and we believe that the scope and the fee that is here is reasonable over the upcoming year to study and analyze whether or not there is a feasible project out there for the community and this board to look at moving ahead with. So with that, I'd ask Mark and or Kyle to come up.
Are there any questions for Roger before we move on?
I do.
Just a question about process.
Well, first of all,
Maria?
thank you to the members of the selection committee, because I'm sure it was a long and involved process. And maybe you could just speak a little bit to the scope of work with regard to the number of options that you ask them to produce, because I saw that it's recommending at least 6 different options, and when you think about how complicated this particular part of town is and these crossings are, how realistic is it that we might get 6 options, and does having a lower number that might reduce hours spent and costs spent?
And I'm not sure we'd come up with 6 individual standalone options, and that's always a tough situation. There is no standard. Do we ask for 3 options, 5, 10, 15? I think on the Beltway we had 100, and then we narrowed them down. Antelope Valley had a number of them. Each project area in this one, I think we looked at, the consultant proposed maybe up to 10 alternatives to start with. We really sat and talked and said, we're not sure there's 10 separate standalone alternatives. So for costing purposes and just for practicality, we brought that down to 6, thinking that surely as they look at alternatives, and quite often these alternatives come forward through a public meeting, people say, have you thought about this, or could you do it that way? What if? And those alternatives and lines all get put on a map, and then the consultants take those and they start looking at them and try to decide what's feasible and what's not, what's doable, what's not, what is perhaps efficient or cost effective or not on some of those. I don't think 3 is enough. I thought 10 was too many. I think 6 is somewhere in the middle. And Deb and Roy, certainly I would hope at some point you would feel free to weigh in on the whole process and your thoughts too. One of the other things about a professional services contract, when you've got a project with this kind of scope, we're really paying them for the work they're going to do based on reasonable rates for the work and activity that they do. If after going through a couple public meetings and they come up and say, there's really only a couple of alternatives, that's all we will move forward with. My experience over the years have found what usually happens is there's lots of good ideas and you need to take pieces and parts. Kent Seacrest with Antelope Valley used to call it tinker toys. And you take one stick from here and a part from over there, and sometimes you take 2 alternatives and put them together and come up with a different solution. And I would expect that that's probably where we'll end up with this project as well. So an excellent question. I guess the thing is, we're not going to pay them to find 6 if we only think there's 3 or 4 as we go through that process, and we will regularly be weighing in on that.
Thank you.
Bill, did you have a question?
I do. Roger, would you mind commenting on the cost of basic services and the reimbursable expenses? In particular, how does this compare to other firms in the market? Are we getting the best deal here, or are we not?
That's always a challenge in a professional service. What I would tell you is this firm, like the other firm that we shortlisted, are professional. They have put their best people there, and the hourly rates and overhead rates that they're proposing are within the industry standards, and that's what the federal aid guides say, that for an engineer, there's a range of a reasonable salary, and if they're in that. There's a range for a project manager, for administrative staff. So every effort or work hour that is put in is tracked by that firm, will be reviewed by Chris Humphrey and myself, ultimately by Chris, and then ultimately signed off by myself and Deb for work actually done and product delivered. If they're supposed to deliver something and something isn't to us, we're not paying for those kinds of things. You're really paying for what you're asking them to do. There are some minor things in there as direct expenses. Those seemed reasonable. They're just trying to, you know, whatever paper and mileage and those kind of things, those you recover those at the end. Every year, at the end of the year, these professional terms are audited, and their overhead rates are adjusted up and down for the hours that they charge. They recover the cost of office and phone and those kind of things in there. The overhead rates of this firm, I think, are comparable, competitive with others. This is clearly not a put out a product out there and ask for a low bid. This is really about professional services and paying them their acceptable rates for doing this work for us under qualification base. So in this kind of work, it's very difficult. If we were going to ask somebody to design one block of water main, you know exactly what you're asking them to do. In this case, we have no idea what kind of alternatives we might come up with. We're not sure how many public meetings we might actually have. We're not sure when you have to go back and reproduce some work. So the rates that they're charging are reasonable and professional, and we will watch to make sure that we're receiving the service for those hours that come to us. I'm not sure that answered the question, but it's clearly not a low bid or best bid scenario in qualification based.
But you did address the comparability issue.
Yes.
This is competitive with comparable services that you would receive from comparable professional organizations.
Yes, that's
firms.
Correct. Yes.
And then just for background, once the firm was selected, I believe we had 3 meetings, approximately 2 hours each in length. And just for your reference, this is the scope of work that we went through line by line by line. And so there was a great attention to detail to make sure that every proposed activity or project really fit within the scope of work and that we were getting a good value for the dollars we were spending.
If I may say, I know that you're tighter than 2 coats of paint, so I would trust your judgment.
I will take that as a compliment. Larry?
Well, I just want to add that I think it is good that we've got a new firm working on this with a fresh set of ideas. Commissioner Shore will know that I was in her office many times saying we've got to take a look at the total impact, the grain industry and John Henry's Plumbing and those businesses. If they can't get in and out and we can't facilitate those trucks, and if we can do anything for safety along the line, we need to take a comprehensive look. So in your prospectus, as Commissioner Shore shared that with me, I outlined several of the things that you mentioned, and I think you will do a good job. It will be a challenge. I don't know if 6 is the right number. I would hope, and I don't probably think that we'll have 6 different scenarios, but probably variations of 2 or 3 when you finally get down to it. But your willingness to look at this whole comprehensive item. We need to do something with Adams. We need to do something with 33rd. I don't think we've found the right answer yet, but that's what we hope to do, and I think this will be a worthwhile expenditure.
And this seems like a perfect time to bring up Mark and Kyle.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. Again, my name is Mark Lucha Harms. I'm with the Shimmer Associates here in Lincoln. With me is Kyle Anderson with Felsberg, Holt, and Olevig. I'll refer to them later as FHU, as they go by themselves. Kyle and I are representing various members of our consultant team that you have selected to lead this challenging and important project, and we are thoroughly grateful for the opportunity to work with you to execute this project. As Roger alluded to, in addition to Shimmer as the lead for this firm and FHU serving as a heavy lifter as well, we do have 3 other firms that are part of our team that will have a smaller role in the project. Those firms include Iteris, who has a local office here in Lincoln, Intuition and Logic, who is a firm out of St. Louis that has a significant amount of experience with dealing with floodway analysis, since we're dealing with Dead Man's Run in this location. They'll be helping us coordinate with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Lower Platte South NRD, who has another project that's going on associated with Dead Man's Run. And then finally, we have Midwest Right-of-Way Services that will assist us as we're putting cost estimates together as to what some of the impacts to some of the surrounding properties might be with the various alternatives that we're looking at. So Kyle and I just thought we'd step through very briefly the scope of services that we have proposed and negotiated at this point. Maybe before I get to that point, in terms of talking about our qualifications, just 2 pieces of information that we included in our proposal and interview that might be of interest to you. First of all, combined, Shimmer and FHU have done a significant amount of work for you on other RTSD projects within the last 5 to 7, maybe even 10 years. So we have a significant amount of experience in working with you and working with Roger on RTSD type projects. Secondly, obviously this is going to take a fair amount of creativity to find the right solution that addresses the primary problem of eliminating the 2 at-grade crossings, but then also trying to fit in with the city's long-range transportation plan. We don't want to be short-sighted on just putting viaducts over the 2 railroad crossings and not fitting in with whatever else might be going on with the transportation network moving forward. So where I'm going with that is Kyle's firm FHU and Shimmer were 2 of the 3 firms that were involved in the design competition for 14th, Warlick, and Old Cheney. Now, mind you, a solution hasn't been implemented yet, but I guess we can say that we, as individual firms or teams, as a part of that process, came up with numerous alternatives to try to address that traffic problem as well. So we're confident that we can be creative in identifying a number of solutions, whether it's 10 or 6. We feel that we've right-sized that scope, and we do feel that 6 is an appropriate number to move forward with in exploring alternatives for this project. So again, just what is this project all about? There's essentially 3 key objectives, or maybe 2. Again, the primary one we fully get is to address the 2 at-grade crossings. This is your project. It's not a city project, so that will be the number 1 project. In doing that, we'll do it with a complete streets mindset. And what that means is that we'll take into consideration all modes of transportation, not just the cars and trucks that are traveling over, per se, a viaduct, if that's the solution, but also looking at pedestrians, bicyclists, and then also any needs for transit or buses that are using any of the project area roadways. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be certain that we make sure that any concepts that we evaluate and certainly move forward or recommend will be compatible with the city and the county's long-range transportation plan, so that we're not looking in a vacuum or with blinders on and not seeing the forest through the trees, so to speak. So really, the scope that we've outlined and proposed to you has 4 key elements. Again, the first is determining and confirming what the area's transportation needs are, not only today, but also looking into the future, 20, 25 years out, and perhaps beyond. Secondly, and Kyle's going to talk about this in greater detail in a little bit, but the second primary element will be community outreach or public engagement. We call it a citizen participation process, just making sure that we talk to various stakeholders, have public meetings, report back to you folks on a regular basis, just to make sure that we're hearing everyone's needs that are appropriate and needed for us to develop sound solutions and moving the project forward. Third, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, evaluating any impacts to environmental resources that are within the area, whether it be floodplains, historical properties, so forth and so on. And then finally, the meat and potatoes from an engineering perspective, developing short and long-term solutions for the needs and the deficiencies that we identify. So again, as I mentioned, Kyle will talk in a second about a little bit more detail of our citizen participation approach, but This process is also going to require a significant amount of coordination with a wide variety of agencies that have an interest or some relationship to the project. That begins with obviously the railroad, Burlington Road and Santa Fe. They will be a very interested participant in this process. Secondly, and these are in no particular order, but second would be the Federal Highway Administration. There's a couple of reasons, although they're very much related, why we want to involve them. First of all, this study is being funded obviously locally, but part of our scope of services will be identifying what funding sources there might be to fund the various individual projects that might come out of our solution. And with that being, with one of those potential funding sources being Federal Highway Administration, we certainly want to bring them on board early and keep them involved in the process throughout. Certainly the Nebraska Department of Roads for a couple of reasons also. Cornhusker Highway, which was in very much near proximity to both of these crossings, is also Highway 6. But secondly, the Department of Roads also oversees a lot of the activities and coordination that goes along with the railroads. And they're also an agency that we'll look to for identifying potential funding sources that relates to the railroad and bridge funds and so forth and so on. Certainly the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County, as being local agencies, we'll need to keep them involved. Certainly because of this being within the city and being cognizant of the long-range transportation plan, keeping the city and the MPO and so forth involved will be very important. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, for the reason I already mentioned, because of the Dead Man's Run study that is going on currently, and associated with that is the Lower Platte South NRD. We've identified many other stakeholders, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and then numerous other environmental resource agencies that will have interest in the project, whether it be Game and Parks Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, so forth and so on. So as I mentioned, and this is another reason that we brought FHU on board, is they have a significant amount of experience in executing projects through a process called PEL, or PEL, or Planning and Environmental Linkage Study. And this is a process that, in short, allows us to do feasibility studies and alternatives analysis without any necessary funding oversight or federal oversight that doesn't circumvent or preclude federal funding from being involved in subsequent design and NEPA phases. And so by performing this project through this Federal Highway Administration recognized process of PEL, it'll ensure that anything that we do now as a part of this feasibility study will be recognized by Federal Highway Administration as we move on, or if the project is moved on to subsequent more detailed environmental analysis and design phases. So it is a new process to the state, but we have the support of the locals at Federal Highway here in Nebraska to be represented with the project, and they're looking forward to this project being executed under that umbrella. So before in your handout, I should have referenced this before I started talking. This is essentially a summary of our scope of services. And what I just talked about was page 1. If you turn to page 2, under the title of work tasks, that is just a bullet listing of all the detailed work tasks that are in our scope of services. And I'm not going to go through those in greater detail because I think what you might be most interested in is the citizen participation process that we're going to execute as a part of this project. And maybe just to talk about a couple key bullet points as it relates to that process. We've identified Kyle because of his many years of experience in leading transportation projects similar to this and employing various strategies from a public involvement standpoint within those projects. Kyle was identified very early on in our 2-year process of pursuing this project as being a very appropriate person to lead this element of our project. So with that, Kyle, I'll let you talk for a second.
Thanks, Mark. I won't go into great detail, but I do want to mention the comment that Roger made about the large meeting they had previously, and I think that reflects the amount of interest that there is on this project. And we certainly see a lot of stakeholder groups involved throughout. This is going to have pretty significant impacts to the businesses and property owners in that area, and it's important to get them engaged early and often through that process. So just a few of the things for your information and opportunities to engage with the folks. One of the very first things we'll be starting on, probably yet this week or next week, is the development of our citizen participation plan. we've made certain assumptions in our scoping process of what would be involved. The next step is to get into the detail of how we're actually going to perform those various tasks and duties. So we'll be working very closely with the RTSD and the city staff in developing that very detailed and specific plan. We will have some information available to the general public. We anticipate publishing and distributing 3 newsletters throughout the course of the study. There'll be a project website that'll be kept current throughout. But really the most important is the direct interaction with the people that are involved out there that live with the project and commute and use the facilities. We've identified several stakeholder outreach meetings where we'll have much smaller focused meetings with groups maybe in different sections of the area that would have similar impacts to their operations. Numerous one-on-one meetings, and we do want to be available if anybody does want to get together privately. We have found in previous projects that not all businesses want to be open and share their operations with their neighbors or competitors. So sometimes they would have those meetings very somewhat privately, but at least get their point across to our project team. In addition to those one-on-one and stakeholder meetings, we have identified we'll have 2 open house meetings that'll be advertised, open to the general public. And typically it's not difficult to draw out the people that are very impacted by the project locally. The challenge is getting the commuters to those meetings. And we'll develop some techniques to be able to get the input from the people that maybe don't live or have a business right on the site, but use it every day, going back and forth to school or to work. A lot of times those people are underrepresented through our public outreach efforts, so we want to make an effort to be able to bring them in. We will likely have the first meeting fairly early in the process. We like to get together and show them that we basically have a clean sheet of paper. We may have some preconceived ideas in our heads, but we don't share them at that time. We really want to hear what are the issues as far as they're concerned. And then the second open house meeting would be presenting what we found. Here's what we've heard from you throughout the process. Here's our engineering analysis and our judgment. And here are the options that we think would solve those issues. So in addition to those meetings, I think Mark mentioned it maybe earlier, was we will also be at all of your RTSD board meetings over the course of the 12 months to give you an update and a chance for you to ask questions directly to us. And then we've also identified attending one of the city-county commons meetings to be able to keep both the county board and the city council abreast as to what we've been up to.
Thanks, Kyle.
Any questions at this point? Okay.
Just one question. Will there be clear ways that the public can reach you outside of these meetings if they have questions beyond the formal events that are held?
Absolutely. At a minimum, on the website, there would be information to reach both myself, Chris Humphrey, who will be serving as the project manager for the RTSD, directly have key points of contact for the general public to reach out to us. I assume that we'll have a place where they can submit online comment. That'll be in the form of an email that will reach us as well. We do understand that there may be some interest with the local media to do an early story about this project, which we think will be very key in kind of hopefully setting the tone and getting the information out early, because that's what we really want to do. Is we want to make sure that everybody realizes there is a problem to be addressed here. And not try to sell a solution that not everybody's convinced doesn't need to be solved, if that makes sense. So we feel that's a key element of our citizen participation approach in I guess what we call establishing legitimacy for the project. And conversely, establishing legitimacy that you're the appropriate agency to lead the project, which in this case I think it's pretty easy. There's not many others, save for the locals, but I think the RTSD is an obvious leading agency for this project. So yes, we will make sure that there are opportunities for others outside of the formal events to reach us and to share their input.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. How early do you anticipate, when you talked about the first open meeting, how early would you anticipate that would take place?
That's a great segue. Just real quickly, on the third page is just an aerial photo of the overall project area that we'll be looking at as a part of this study, with the 2 crossings highlighted. But then if you turn to your last page, And I believe this was in your packet that you received as well, but I was planning on just summarizing it real quickly this morning anyway. This is our schedule, and as we develop the public involvement plan that Kyle talked about, we also have our kickoff meeting for the project scheduled later this month, and then we also have a separate kickoff meeting with those various agencies that I talked about already scheduled for July 2nd as well. Some of those activities and the associated projects will obviously affect this schedule, but this is what we know best at this point in time. And as you can see under the category of alternatives, under the category of opportunities, our first public open house is scheduled for tentatively October, let's just call it fall, of this coming year. And that'll depend on a lot of things, where the project sits with regard to the other activities that are performed to date, personnel availability, venue availability, and so forth and so on. But this fall would be our first opportunity that we're anticipating for that first large open house, come one, come all type event.
And I'd like to add to that, one of the reasons that it is several months after we get started on the project is the early phase of our study is understanding all of the issues that are involved out there. So there's a lot of data collection efforts and analysis of existing conditions. We want to be able to go into that open house meeting understanding exactly what the issues are and what we're dealing with, so we can answer more effectively any questions or comments that might come up during that meeting.
Thank you.
So certainly a lot more detail in that schedule that I wasn't going to go into, but I would certainly be willing to answer any questions about the schedule or anything else that we presented to you this morning or that was in your packet. I know there was a lot of information there. Probably not enough time to go through each item line by line, as Ms. Shore referred to previously. But if that's your preference, we'll walk you through it line by line. But again, certainly happy to answer any questions. But again, thank you for this opportunity to work with you on this project.
Bill?
I do have one question. I assume this tentative schedule of meetings, it's very extensive, is subject to amendment. I mean, if you need to add meetings, you can do that. If you need to take, you may not need all these meetings.
That is absolutely correct. This is our best guess, if you will, at this point. And hopefully we feel that we have right-sized that. But certainly if we find that there are excessive meetings that we've identified or there's more, then certainly we do think that the citizen participation component of this project is perhaps the most important. Don't want to elevate one thing over the others, but we want to make sure that we hear everyone. We're not going to appease everyone. There are people that will be impacted by this project if it does get constructed more than others, but we want to make sure that we reach out to them, we hear their concerns, we know their needs, and do our best to accommodate as many stakeholders that we can, but recognizing that we're not going to accommodate all of them.
Without this process, it would never be considered a legitimate project by the people who are affected. Never.
Correct.
And even then, it's hard to get it.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Any additional questions? I just want to comment on something you said. You said, in short, the PEL process is. I've learned there's nothing short about the PEL process. That was the one thing that surprised me as we went through the process, was how that will interplay not only through this design, but through construction. So I think it's something we'll all learn about as we move forward. This is one of the first PEL process completed in the state of Nebraska. So once again, we're breaking ground.
Yep. Yeah, just to maybe to expand upon that, we may not recognize the benefits and efficiencies as part of this study, but assuming the project does move forward into construction, that's when you really see the efficiencies of the PEL process. And again, as I mentioned, there hasn't been a lot of, this is really the second project perhaps in the state, but FHU has conducted numerous projects in our nearby neighbor of Colorado, more than 7 projects under the same process. So we bring one of the national experts to you in terms of moving a project through that process, and are excited to do so.
Larry?
And you mentioned that the PEL process is a federally recognized process. Does that mean that you are then more eligible for federal funding, or that you are eligible for more federal funding because you've undertaken this process, if whoever goes forward?
One of the challenges with federal funding is the environmental review process that's involved. And one of the requirements of having to do NEPA, follow the NEPA process, do an environmental assessment, is that the funding has to be identified and obligated for project, for all segments of a project. If that's not available, you can't go through that process and get a signed document. What the PEL process allows is to go through all of the analysis leading up to that point, and then once funding is identified, and this may very well be a project that is built in phases over time based on funding, then you're able to break it down and get those federally approved environmental documents as you go and build those phases. So that's the advantage of it, is you look at it in the total context of it, but you can't finish that work because you don't have the funding identified at that point.
Okay. So time efficiency?
Yes. What we found in Colorado is that on large major projects like this, that normally would have been an environmental assessment, which can be a very lengthy and costly process. After having gone through the PEL process, the segments then that were built were able to be done under a categorical exclusion, which was much more efficient and less costly to do that. Okay. That isn't always the case, but even the ones that went to environmental assessment, all of the groundwork had been laid, all of the agencies had been involved from the beginning of the project, so there were no surprises. They knew exactly what they were getting into at the time.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mark or Kyle? Roger, do you have any comments before I ask for a motion?
Just that I would recommend approving this contract, but before you do that, in order, if the board's pleasure is to authorize entering into this contract, I need to give you a recommendation on a slight budget reconciliation. In the current budget, and I've been advised each year, well, there needs to be adequate dollars in the budget to enter into a contract. This line item, 33rd BNSF, currently has a budgeted amount of $500,000. And what I would recommend, I'm recommending approval of this contract, that we would take and move $150,000 from the RTSD OPPD at 91st and Yankee Hill Crossing. That crossing will not be built. There's $500,000 in there. That we'd reduce that to $350,000 and we'd move $150,000 down to this project, making that total $650,000. I would make that recommendation to be part of your motion to amend this. We won't spend that money, and everything then carries over, and we'll talk a little bit more about some other budget adjustments and we get into the upcoming items. But again,
the $50,000 is coming from which line on our
150 from the very first construction project called.
Got it. Okay. Making that 350 and making the 600.
Making the 500 650.
And Roger, could you talk a little bit just generally about the costs? This is a massive undertaking, this larger project. Right now we're just talking about the study itself, but looking further down out the horizon, there will be other sources of funding beyond the RTSD. Can you just review again for the people who are watching?
Good question. Huge, massive. One of the concepts that we looked at, if you really kind of go to the nth degree of a huge overpass and intersections and connectivity, we're talking about a project that could cost $70 to $80 million in total. We're clearly not suggesting, and I don't envision the RTSD as funding all of that. But I do believe that the RTSD has an obligation to the community to prove whether or not there's a viable project. So the plan that I have been espousing and suggesting to this board and the community is that the early study, call it PEL, and environmental work and design to where you actually have a project ready to move ahead should be funded by the RTSD. At that point, if you have a real project and you move into buying right-of-way, the final design, and construction, my goal, you always start with the strategy, is at that point the RTSD would pay for about 50% of the project, and the other 50% would come from a combination of federal funds, state of Nebraska train mile tax funds, and from the railroad. I think that's fair. I think that's doable, and you don't get anywhere without starting or asking those things. And I think that's a reasonable approach for this project to move ahead in the future. But you're right. We want the community to know while we're studying this at the end of this year, if there's a viable project, it is a significant undertaking not to be taken lightly as we move ahead.
Thank you.
Cindy, and you are joining the board at just the most appropriate time, as this project would directly affect your constituency.
I am, and I was thinking as we were having everyone testify that I'm really glad to see something moving ahead on this project, because I do have so many of my constituents and businesses in that particular area, and that I'm committed to doing whatever I can to help engage the constituency and the businesses in participation during this process. So thank you.
Roy.
I'd move that we approve this contract with the provision that the money be transferred from the OPPD 91st Street and Yankee Hill project down to this 33rd and BNSF crossing.
I would second that motion.
I will ask if there's any additional discussion. Okay. Amy, if you'd call the roll.
Short,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I will leave the original proposal in the city county offices if you'd like to review. It gives you additional background on the partners and might be interesting reading for you. So we look forward to spending the next year together. Okay, moving on. Item 7.
We actually have a couple of items that are petitions, letters, and requests. In your packet, you have 3 or 4 letters from some homeowners associations, and the top one from Eric Canfield in Southwest Lincoln. They are requesting consideration of a quiet zone. Lincoln's been working on quiet zones for some period of time. We've done the BNSF corridor along Cornhusker Highway. We have done the south corridor that generally runs on 3rd Street down through the south part of town and all the way out. But what's called the Hastings line or the Amtrak line is one that we were asked about. And we said, well, we always come back and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm going to ask Eric to come up and talk a little bit about his neighborhood and what's going on. I'm going to pass out a map, and then I can come back and we can discuss that a little bit more. So thank you.
And Eric, I believe we have a copy of your documentation here, and last name for the record, Canfield.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. I want to thank Roger for helping me with this project. It's getting worse to me. I've lived there for 3 years now, and over the 3 years, sorry, used all this. Over the 3 years, there's a lot more trains that have been being picked up right now. And when we first moved in, there was probably 4 or 5. And now I've come to find out that it's a bypass, so they can bypass the yard. And if they bypass the yard, they don't have to go through, and they just keep going through there. I mean, every time they go through, they honk the horn 4 times. And that's through the 3 crossings, the South Coddington, and Yankee Hill Brick, Van Dorn and 14th roughly, and South Folsom. You can hear those, all 3 of those at my house. So, and the neighborhood, if you had that print there, Roger highlighted the 3, that's the 3 housing homeowner associations, those 3 boxed out. Okay. There's a lot more houses in that neighborhood, and there's a huge apartment complex just off of that Folsom. And I talked to a resident that moved to our neighborhood that lived in that apartment complex, and he said it woke him up in the middle of the night thinking that it was coming right through his apartment. So when they, you know, they are loud, I mean, everybody knows they're loud. I mean, that's the purpose of them, but we just want our chance to quiet those down.
Any questions for Eric? And we would be talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 crossings within a potential project.
Right. I mean, in the vicinity of my house, there's 3 main ones that are affected, that whole area. Then you get into that South Folsom, and then that A Street one. There's not a lot of houses there, but it's coming into a whole lot, and it kind of curves off. this print here is off just a little bit. The dotted line, it kind of curves down a little more there. But there's, I want to bring up the point that at Sherman Fields, south in Sherman Fields, there's no houses, and there's a crossing there. The Capital Humane Society and Park Boulevard, there's no houses there, and there's a silent crossing. Pioneers Boulevard, there's like 2 houses, but there's a silent crossing there. And 14th and Old Cheney is a nice neighborhood right there, so totally understandable. And 14th and Yankee Hill Road, there's no houses, and 27th and Saltillo, and there's all silent crossings through there. So as a homeowner, it's kind of frustrating to see that where there's no houses.
Well, you obviously have done your research, so, and it takes somebody to make a request to start the process, so thank you for doing that.
I've talked to a bunch of neighbors in our neighborhood, and there's a few people that, don't mind the trains, that it doesn't bother them anymore, but it's in my backyard, so I have a problem.
All right, Roger, how would we proceed with such a request with regards to budget and timeline?
Okay. Glad you asked. I have a plan. If it were this board's pleasure to move ahead with or propose a feasibility study, not unlike we've done for Hickman, for Waverly, for the ones in Lincoln, when we get to the budget, which is the last item, what I would do is I'd recommend to you that we would earmark $25,000 to $40,000 potentially to come out of the emergency and safety. Emergency safety and study has $100,000. If you wanted to approve this feasibility study, we would just then create a line item for this feasibility study and move some money down. I would want to sit down and we could scope that out later and determine how to proceed with hiring somebody. At this point, I don't have any proposal for you, and I also don't want to predispose what that study might cost either without sitting down and doing a little bit of analysis on that. I have more crossings marked in there because even though there aren't many houses down there on Coddington, if a train is coming into Lincoln and that horn blows, you can hear it all the way up through. Same way up at 2nd and F, that whole area in there is South Bottoms and part of that triangle. So this was my best quick guess of the crossings that perhaps should be looked at in the bigger picture if you're going to do a quiet zone. We have people that call me still regularly, and they're hearing trains that are 2 and 3 miles away. So it's not just the neighborhood, but I think we could fund it out of that without changing the budget total at all for next year, but we could discuss that further when we get to that budget item. Or you could make a motion that you want to do a feasibility study and that we would take care of that in the actual budget approval in the next item.
Comments from the board?
Just have a question actually for Roger. We also received a letter from the Lee's Place Homeowners Association, but that was talking about train blockages that people couldn't get across. And the study that we're talking about wouldn't address that issue, would it?
No, it would not. And on my list of to-do things is trying to meet again with the terminal supervisors. It appears to me that there's a bit of a change in operations and where they're running trains, where they're building trains, or where they're having trains wait, which is causing some backup and some closure issues. I think part of that work could be done as we work on a quiet zone, just getting to know them a little bit better. Other parts of town, we've got some gentlemen's agreements where the railroad tries not to operate a train at certain times of the day. And out here at Folsom and Coddington, there's a couple of those spots that we need to work on that. But I need to understand why there's all of a sudden more trains, because typically you say that's the Amtrak line, there's a couple trains in the middle of the night, that ought to be it. So obviously there are some, if Harlan was here, he could probably tell me what
This is the perfect Harlan project.
What was going on out there.
It sounds kind of rough that some of the wait is happening during morning commute time. So.
Yes.
I can
Can you
answer
speak to
some of
that?
that because I talked to Roger, and Roger was telling me about that he got a bunch of letters, And Burlington did a very good job on readjusting that. So since these letters have came out, they don't stop there anymore. So I think that address, it's been addressed. So
Glad to hear that. Thank you.
yeah, I appreciate all that too.
See what
So
happens when you speak up?
Yeah, exactly. If we were to undertake this project, am I counting this would be the 7th quiet zone or 8th?
I think either 6th or 7th. We've got a couple of them because the one we did down south, we had to split it into two. So
okay.
Close to that. And certainly if the board wanted to approve the feasibility study, I'm more than willing to try to come back with a better number at the September meeting to actually make that adjustment before we would actually move any money today, because I've not really analyzed that at all.
Bill?
I understand the cost, some costs would be involved in a feasibility study, but are there also costs associated with improving safety at these crossings, which is, of course, the reason for the horns?
Yes. In order to create a quiet zone or a silent crossing, you have to put in the basic supplemental safety measures. You need a raised median, you need gates and lights, you need to have things that keep positive reinforcement from folks from going around the gates and lights.
So these don't have gates and lights?
Some of them do, some don't. That would be part of the feasibility study, is to analyze what equipment is out there, what safety measures are there, and which ones would need to be added, and what are the costs to do those. The cost for the safety or the quiet zone in Hickman is about $1.4 million when we got all said and done. Putting in gates and lights and circuitry for the railroad is not an inexpensive situation. We will be back talking to the board. We're currently looking at one out by Denton and analyzing that, but the cost of equipment can be high, and then the board would have to determine whether or not the cost to actually implement a quiet zone is significantly more than the feasibility study to analyze what it would take to put one in.
So Roger, you've outlined two options for us, but could you clarify what they are? You said either today or next time. Can you explain that again?
I think what I would really recommend to you is that when we get to the budget, we would come back to this item, and I would ask you, as a part of an approval or a motion to approve the budget, that we would either add or not add the feasibility study, with the money to come from the emergency and safety study line, and that I would bring you back a better number, and that would be adjusted in the September meeting, but it would not affect the bottom line on the budget. The budget total would stay the same.
Okay, thank you.
Is that clear to everyone? All right. Thank you very much for being here and for being an active resident in your community. All right. Are there any other?
I've got another
Item B, yes.
Yes.
Item B is an agreement, and the activity would be asking the board to approve, board chair and executive director to enter into an agreement to share in the cost between the BNSF Railroad, the Nebraska Department of Roads, and the RTSD to replace the existing crossing on Cornhusker Highway that's at approximately 63rd Street. That's the spur line that comes from the main line, crosses Cornhusker Highway, goes into Concrete Industries, and then goes around and crosses 70th Street and goes into the new salvage yard out there. That crossing is beat up, it's patched, it's rough, it needs new panels. I've been trying for more than 3 years to get the railroad to work on an agreement. The responsibility for the crossing panels itself is the railroad, but in the long history of the RTSD, we have offered to cost share and pay quite often for the materials, not the work, to get the crossings improved. This is one of those things that got lost, I think, on Andy Amprin's desk, and we now have a new individual down there. It is Highway 6, so it is the Nebraska Department of Roads that's initiating this agreement. It's called a supplemental agreement because NDOR and the railroad have a master agreement where they've already agreed on how they work together in replacing crossings and doing cost share. So this supplemental just simply says, per the parent agreement, the railroad NDOR are going to come in and replace that crossing. Those are the conditions. Here's the approximate cost. And in this case, the RTSD always tries to pick up a cost share of the local government in that area. In this case, take into account the railroad, nothing moves fast. It could easily be another couple years before that all gets done. I will push on them with an agreement in place. I'll get there, but the estimated cost for this RTSD is $55,800. That would come out of crossing improvements. We don't need to adjust the budget at all to do that, but it might well be the next budget year before you actually pay that out. Sometimes the railroad does the work and it can take them a year to get you a bill. So I'd recommend the money will come out of the crossing improvement, but the action before you is whether or not you agree to have the RTSD participate in that, and your motion to approve that would authorize Chair Shore and myself to sign that agreement.
Any additional questions for Roger on this agreement? If not, is there a motion? Oh, Bill?
There is a cost of $169,090.
Basically split a third between the Highway Department, the railroad, and the RTSD. So our share is just a little under $56,000. That's the estimate.
We may have to wait 2 years for the railroad to reimburse.
For the railroad to do the work.
Oh, do the work.
The railroad will do the work. It's their crossing and they have to do the work. We can't do that. But we can push them to try to get them to do that.
With our $55,000.
Yes.
Is there a
I
motion?
move approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Call roll, please. Yes.
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 Okay, motion carries unanimously. Item 8, 2015-2016 budget and CIP.
All right, with these proposed changes, I've got updated proposed budget sheet and also a slightly revised CIP sheet. And even with that revised, we may have to do a couple of amendments to it. Let's not put over some. Thank you. Very briefly, if you would look at this sheet, this is just a revised sheet showing the proposed draft budget for 15-16 at the far right column. And again, for people listening, I would simply highlight a couple of things. The upper third of the sheet is operating expenses. And last year's budget, or the year we're in, was $90,050. Proposing to move that to $92,450, just a slight increase. We haven't always spent that, but with inflation, some other things, there's a potential that could go up just a little bit. I want to reference on under other services and charges, and there is, for some reason, perhaps a misprint. The line item, the second one down under other services and charges, the $6,200 and the $10,300, that is the legal contract and the accounting budget. Based on the auditing and budgeting and accounting contract we just approved, we would need to adjust that line item from $10,300 to $10,500. That's the not to exceed amount in the contract that we approved. So that would be one revision I would propose. Quick quickly reminding people in the construction projects, the upper portion, $250,000 for railroad crossing repair and improvements in the city of Lincoln, $50,000 in the county, for a total of $300,000. That's the amount we've carried every year for a long time. That's the area in which we would pay for, like, the new crossing at 63rd and Cornhusker Highway. The other proposed change, based on your approval of the contract for 33rd, 35th, the draft budget that you were given had $600,000 proposed for FY16. That, I would recommend, needs to be increased now based on the contract we just signed, in addition to, because that contract is $640,000, which nothing carries over. You have to rebudget it. So any money not spent this year doesn't go into the account for next year. You have to rebudget that. So in addition to paying for the consultant's time of $640 over the course of that year, there's also time for our project manager and other engineering that will occur in engineering services for public works. And I'm also including my time. I am going to be spending a significantly more amount of my time being involved in this project, looking out for the RTSD, than just my normal administrative duties to manage and to come to the board meetings. So in that, our project manager has put together an estimate of her and my time and other staff time over the course of the year. That was estimated at about $125,000. So my recommendation to you is that we put $650 for the consultant. That leaves about $10,000, and $150 for city costs, for a total of $800,000 that would be in that line item for the upcoming year. And again, if Chris and I don't spend that time, we aren't charging that time. I would also pledge to you that Chris will prepare an actual spreadsheet that kind of shows how she estimated her and my time and the things we'd be involved in, and she and I will track that. Likewise, Deb signs off on every monthly statement that comes through on city engineering staff time as well. So I would propose that $800,000 in that line item, and then that would, with those changes, if nothing else changed, and again, the quiet zone would come from within the $100,000 of emergency safety and study, so that doesn't change. That number would just go down, and we'd have a line item for the feasibility would go up. That would be neutral. So the bottom line, the $8,149,150 would go up $200.
Which is the reference to the 10,300 to 10,500.
$200, yes. So I believe it would be $8,149,350. And I didn't go through every other single line item in there. We've gone over that before, but I certainly would try to answer any questions you've got about anything else in the budget. I might say then, before we actually approve or don't approve or revise the budget, the second sheet that I handed you out is the actual CIP sheet that's used to develop cash flow. And in red, I showed the one number in the capital projects that would change, the $800,000 in 15-16. That just reflects, and then we use that number for cash flow when we get ready to talk about levies. Any questions on the budget?
Roy?
So in this budget proposal, are we also including the proposal for a study on the quiet zone we just heard about? Do we have to approve that as part of this budget?
Yes, I think you would need to say you want us to do the feasibility study, but I would come back with a number of what we'd propose to take out of that other line item and put in for a feasibility study at September. I think at that point, it would actually allow the board to approve or disapprove that amount of money to be put into the feasibility study.
And you're referring to this as the Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone?
Yes.
So Roger, are you saying that we wouldn't move an amount like 40,000 that you have for other feasibility studies as a placeholder? You would ask us to just create a line item, or?
If you were comfortable in moving 40 down, I would do that today, but I would still bring a proposal back
Right.
In September, hopefully. So actually, that would be cleaner and clearer. That would send a message for the homeowners that you do want us to move ahead with the feasibility study. So that's a much better approach than I suggested. Thank you.
Well, I would be willing to make that motion that we take 40,000 out of the RTSD emergency safety and study and create a line item for the Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone, and have you come back in September with more specific studied figures to support that line item.
Second.
Additional comments or questions?
So we have seen a lot of development in this area, and there are a lot of crossings, and it is loud. I can say I hear those trains as well from further east, and I think it's nice to have people actually come forward, not just city officials, when they want to make a change in their community. So I think it bears some analysis.
I will just give a caveat. It will take longer than you think to accomplish the process. We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Shore?
Yes.
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Gilbert?
Yes.
Hudson?
Yes.
And is there a motion with regard to the...
I move we approve the budget as presented by Mr. Feigard with the
Second.
With
amendments.
the amendment, the accounting services line is increased by $200.
Right.
Any additional comments or questions?
Oh, just that, Roger, you meant, I wanted to point out that the South Beltway line item has for 2015, 2016, 4.3 million. And that's, can you confirm that is because we are starting to accrue 2 million a year for that project? And that's why we see 4 million?
I meant to mention that.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you
seems
very
like a big
much.
thing
The
to-
goal, at least the nodding
Yeah.
heads from the board, has been to continue to accumulate and save money for the railroad portion of the South Beltway. And the best way I can do that, again, because every year we had $2,167,000 budgeted for this year. That doesn't carry over. In order to keep accumulating that, so now I've doubled up this year and next year into the 4 million to try to keep the full 13 million in there over the 5 years and approximately available when they'd start on the Beltway on 2020. So, thank you.
Thank you, Larian, for pointing that out. All right, we have a motion and a second on the proposed budget. Call the roll, please.
Shore?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Gilbert?
Yes.
Hudson?
Yes.
Not done? Okay.
I'm handing, now that you've approved the budget, and I put you into that, we typically also, we need to make a levy request to the county board. County board does have control under the lid law and those 15 cents for a number of political subdivisions, of which the RTSD is one of those. What I handed out to you is a sheet with 4 different levies shown, and there's good news and there's bad news. The top one is the current levy that we're operating under, which is 1.3 cents. The maximum is 2.6. The second one is 1.6. The third one is 2 cents, and the bottom one is 2.6, which is the maximum. And my whole purpose of this is to confirm to folks that with a full levy, with these projects plugged in the CIP, this entity can fund these projects with the 2.6 levy. So on the sheet that was handed out, on those sheets, at the far left-hand column shows you what happens with the cash in hand as we try to fund the projects for those levies. So at 1.3 cents, you'll note when we get down to FY 18-19, we've got a little over $600,000. Then we go 6 million in the hole, all the way down to eventually $23 million in the red. So obviously, if the levy stays at 1.3 cents, we can't afford to build those projects, and we will have to make adjustments in the future, delay, extend, or reduce the cost of those projects. 1.6 cents, we actually gain, we have more money left in 18-19, but we go red again in 19-20. If you increase the levy to 2 cents, we get a couple more years. We still got cash at fiscal 21-22, and then we go in the red 22-23. But the point of the whole exercise was if the district can garner its full levy, it can fund these projects. At the 2.6, it shows us staying in the black all the way down through those years. And I guess so my recommendation to the board would be to request the 2.6 cent levy from the county board. I do not make light of the fact of the obligations, the burdens, some of the responsibilities have been put on the county without some funding, so I don't take that lightly. But I do this because I believe this is one of the single best entities in this county for facing some significant safety issues, delay, and conflict issues, and the resources are there to continue to do the good work that we've done in the future. And at some point in the next 6 months or so, I think we'll be visiting about future projects. Just because we finish these doesn't mean we're done. We're a growing community, and there are some other things happening south and southeast of this community that could have a significant impact on at-grade crossings in this community. So I would try to answer any questions that you've got about the levy.
Bill?
You assume a 1% annual valuation growth?
You know, I depend totally on Dennis Meyer and county officials to help me with what that is, and Liz Thanel helps with the paperwork, but yes, it says a 1% annual growth rate, 0.5% on interest, and a 3% annual operating expense increase. We have not seen an increase really in the operating expenses like that, but then our operating expenses are very minuscule in relationship to the capital part of our budget. If in fact the valuations go up or the community continues to grow, then that revenue just continues to increase, and we could cash flow these either quicker, or we could always consider reducing the levy, or we could add other projects. But that was the assumption.
Or we can assume that the annual valuation growth is going to be greater than 1%. This year was 5%. We expect 5%. And then we wouldn't have to increase the levy quite so much.
Being a typical engineer, we try to make sure we estimate high on the cost of projects, and we have a tendency to estimate low on the revenue. Nothing is worse than having you approve a budget and then not have the revenue to do it, or have to come back and say, oh gosh, I really lowballed the cost of that project and I need more money. So this is the more conservative approach. Each year, at the end of the year, the county looks and levels out and gives us an idea where we are. I would like to think and hope that that we'd have more revenue, Bill, but want to be conservative.
And for historical perspective, was it 2 years ago we were at 1 cent, and then last year moved it to 1.3?
Yes.
Okay. And how would these numbers be affected by potentially bonding some of our larger projects, as opposed to the system that we've used before as more of a cash payment, cash flow model?
The biggest advantage always of bonding is if you're in a good market and costs of projects are low. If you bond, and you can do a lot of project in a hurry, and so maybe you get some improvements right away. In this case, you don't hurry this federal aid process a whole lot. Paying as you go, I think, has been a good model for us to do. There's been a lot of talking about bonding at the highway department, at the city, and I would say the construction industry is capable of delivering a certain size program, and just because we would dump a bunch of bonds out there and bid a project, I think quite often we pay a premium for those projects, and because they just can't deliver. And they're not going to gear up for a one-year spike in a program. They can't afford to go buy the equipment for projects 1 year that they may or may not get. So then the other, if we did bond, I do believe the understanding that if this board voted to bond and we sold the bonds, and the county board is obligated at least to provide a levy sufficient to cover the debt service. But my fear, in what we've seen in a lot of places, the city bonded for some roads here a while back, asked the council for general fund. That didn't happen. You borrow money, you got to pay it back, and the debt service for that's coming out of street construction. That for every dollar you pay in debt service back to a bond, that's a dollar you don't have to go do another project. So you're really getting the money quicker, paying up front, and then you're paying it off over time.
Larry?
Just to address Bill's comment, I believe when Liz was before us at the beginning of the meeting, she talked about our revenues for this year and that they were 60,000 over anticipated budget, but that our interest rates were below by about 40,000. So it was a pretty precise overall estimate of our income. I guess to me that speaks to a little bit about how accurate of a job she's been able to do on these estimates.
And you would need a motion today for a proposed levy to recommend to the county board, which then makes the final decision in August.
Yes. And then depending on what the county board does in September, if we need to make an adjustment to the budget. Typically, we have not had to do that because there's enough cash in the bank for the first year. Sometimes we've had to make some adjustments and say, well, if that's where we are, we aren't going to be able to cash flow some of those projects further out, and we may have extended out the CIP a little bit. But
Well, I know I was very pleased to, at the city-county common meeting that we had earlier, Larry, you had mentioned that there was a commitment from the county to get back to the full levy in the next fiscal year. So I guess if something has changed, this might be a good time to talk about it.
Well, of course, we don't have our budget recommendations all put together, and we don't know what kind of year-end savings we may have. I know tomorrow we're going to allocate a couple $100,000 to agencies and line items that are going to go over budget. But my personal feeling is that I'd like to see us be able to start to go back up, and I think we have enough money to meet all the approved projects that we're committed to at this point. But I'd be hopeful that the county board could at least start working on increasing that, raising it up somewheres. I don't know how far we can go yet, but I certainly think that we would try to, since this year it does look like we will have increased revenues because of the major reval, and it's projected around 5%. I don't like to put that figure out there hard and fast right now because it will depend on how many protests we have and what the Board of Equalization does with those protests. But that'd be my feeling. But I'd ask Commissioner Shore and Commissioner Avery for their thoughts.
Let me go to Roy first.
Well, that was the burning question in my mind is you don't know yet where your budget's going to be. And, you know, last year at this very time, we voted as a council to go for 2.6 cents, and it had absolutely no impact. So
didn't have it to give.
Yeah, I understand. But I would recommend 2.6 cents, but I know that's not what's going to happen. So I would like it to have a reasonable projection. And I'll ask the question, is 2 cents out of the question? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot.
I guess that would be, I'm asking, we don't have Dennis here. Liz, would you know what that would equate to? How much?
No, I really
Okay.
Well,
I think a cent is 1.3 1/8. 1 cent is 1/8.
1.8 million.
1.8 million.
well, since this is a wish list anyway,
If you don't mind, if you ask for 2, I'm not sure then the county board, if they had the money, could give you or would give you 2.6. Why would they give us more than we asked for? So again, I guess that's why in the past we've asked for I've recommended to you the 2.6, and then they'll be where they are. I also, Roy, don't have great hopes that it'll be 2.6. I'm usually pretty optimistic, but if we don't ask, we won't know. So,
well, that's my point exactly, that it is right now, the request is kind of a wish. We know what the constraints are that the county board is under, and I respect their process, but I'm going to move that we approve the full 2.6, and that be our request to the county board, understanding their situation.
Second that.
I think and I will echo what Larry said. There is a commitment from the board to continue moving back to the 2.6. I think going from the 1.3 to the 2.6 is a huge jump. I don't foresee that happening. I also do have concerns about the 2.6, just looking at the cash balances that the RTSD would be holding on an annual basis of nearly 10, 11, and $12 million. Not that I want to operate in the red, but you look at those dollars and the possibility of those being in the taxpayer's pocket and not ours.
But the RTSD can't function any other way. We don't have a choice about that. We have to pay as we go under the current model. So that's just the way this works. And it's been 2.6 for years and years and years, and that is the levy devoted to the RTSD. So to say that we're trying to get it back up slowly over time, I think it's more accurate to say that it was 2.6 over time for many, many years, and only recently has been reduced significantly. And we're trying to resume business as usual with our levy that's already codified by law.
Larry?
At 2.6, it had accumulated a balance, Larry, at one time of over $18 million that was sitting there. And in this environment of low interest rates, it wasn't earning very much. People needed that money in their pockets, not paying taxes into a fund which had low earnings. I think the objective of this organization has always been to improve the railroad transportation crossings across the city and the county, but with keeping in mind of always being able to fund those projects and having enough money to do it, not piling up money that's sitting there in an interest-bearing account.
But that is the way it works, and we are trying to.
If we haven't funded something,
yeah.
I guess I'd like to know about it.
Well, we're trying to get money for the South Beltway and for the 33rd and 35th and Adams projects, and
Had the levy stayed at 2.6, we would have already been probably at the end of this year for 33rd, 35th, and Adams. And if we stay at 2.6, or had been at 2.6, we would, instead of probably taking 4 to 6 years to do the environmental and right-of-way, and then another 4 or 5 years to build it, that also could be reduced. So we've laid out the projects based on that availability of cash. And the fact that whether you've got 12 million, 14 million at 18, we also at one point we had to pay out over $9 million for Southwest 40th. Had we not built that up, we couldn't have done that.
And it's still not done. Right?
He delivered. Yes, sir. It's
Bill,
not done.
then Roy.
After 6 years of promises.
Roger, could you explain what are the disadvantages of doing a 2-cent levy? Compare that to what you're proposing at 2.6.
Well, at 2 cents in 2020, the tax year of 2020, we will run out of cash. So in 2021, what we'd have to do then is either not continue to pay for the South Beltway, or we would have to take, if we have a viable project for 33rd, 35th, and Adams, we'll have to stretch it out over more years. In other words, if you look in the second column from the right down there at 2 cents, those items are the capital improvement, or the amount we'd be paying for a project on each year. We'd simply have to reduce what we're paying for our projects and stretch the projects out over a longer period of time.
But if we have a larger annual valuation growth than 1%, then it's very likely that we would be black in that right column there all the way through 2026.
Yes, every additional dollar that comes in, that certainly helps. But what I would tell you is I could build these projects much faster than any of the CIPs we've laid out. I've tried to be careful, and Larry, and Deb, I also respect, I'm a taxpayer in the county as well. I think a lot of people forget 90% of the revenue coming in here to the RTSD comes from the citizens that live in the city of Lincoln, even though it is a full county. And we don't want to take that, and that's why there aren't projects on this list that I don't think are appropriate and viable projects, and they are laid out and funded in the time frame that the revenue allows us to do. If the valuation goes up, the money comes in, that's fine. We only know that from year to year. I'm trying to lay out 10 or 12 years, and I can't afford to not be conservative enough to give the community a false sense that we could do something that we can't do. But you're exactly right. If we get more money in, then the red either goes down or it's reduced. But the bottom line is, even at 2 cents, we can't build. We're at the end of 2025, we're $3.5 million in the hole, so I've got to defer projects to the tune of $3.5 million.
I know that, but what I'm suggesting is that 1% annual valuation growth is too low.
Okay.
Roy, and I do note that the council has a pre-meeting in 9 minutes.
Right. Well, what I'd like to say is that making predictions is always difficult, especially when you're talking about the future. That's Yogi Berra. And but one way we can avoid incurring the penalty of inflation, we could do with something very similar to what the city did on the South Beltway. And as we accrue money, we can give it to the state, make a deal with them to turn it over to them and save the money that would be inflated out from underneath us. So I don't have a problem philosophically, at least according to the South Beltway project, is to build up some of those funds. We can, if we want to move those funds and make them work for us, move them. But to say we don't want to do it because we don't want to accrue too much money, I don't think is a legitimate argument.
And currently, the administration continues to have those conversations. NDOR now has a new director in place, and I would hope we'd be moving ahead with conversations to do some of those very things, Roy, to nail down the district's commitment and try to hold down our costs and get those paid out sooner rather than later.
Bill, are you saying you feel more comfortable or would support the 2 cent?
At this point, probably would, but I have a question about whether this is something we need to do today. The county has not yet finished our budget process.
And prior to the county board meeting and setting the levies, this body needs to make a levy request of the county, and we don't have another meeting now until after your budget meeting in August. Our next one is in September.
Are we prohibited from having additional meetings between now and September?
No. We could schedule another meeting.
Historically, the recommended amount has gone forward. The county board has taken it into consideration and then set the levy, and then we've made the readjustment then back at the September meeting.
I can always run some other scenarios. Based on the cash that's available and what we propose to do next year, we don't jeopardize the budget no matter what the levy is that comes in. So there's time to have those continued discussions on what is an appropriate inflation or growth rate to do that. And I can run Liz and I can run some other scenarios on
I'd like to see
1,
that.
2, and 3, and 4%. And then
I don't know how typical 5% growth for 2015 is. maybe it's wildly unusual, but that is what we're experiencing this year. That leads me to expect that 1% might be too low.
One of the things we always want to remember when you set a levy, first of all, that levy, people pay all their taxes a year in the arrears. So you can set, if whatever the levy gets set as it goes up, we'll only see just a few dollars of that towards the end of the next fiscal year. That levy goes up starting July 1. People aren't even going to make the first installment on those till next April, and then again in August. So the turnaround time on that is slow too, but I'd be tickled to death to visit with Dennis, run some other scenarios. I don't think that changes my recommendation to you to still request the 2.6, and I'll work on as many scenarios as you want to the future.
We do have a motion and a second on the floor to recommend the 2.6.
Why can't we postpone a decision and schedule a meeting for July or June? No, not June, but July. Give Roger time to look at these other possible outcomes.
Maker of the motion.
I'd like a vote.
Okay. Okay. We have a motion and a second on the 2.6. Is there any additional discussion? Call the roll, please.
Shore?
No.
Christensen?
Yes.
Avery?
Not voting.
Yes.
No.
The motion fails due to a vote of 2-2. I assume we will follow through with Bill's suggestion to have Roger run some alternate scenarios, and we will discuss the possibility of calling a special meeting prior to the time that the county board would make the final decision for a recommendation. Comfortable with that? Okay. Are there any additional items? I recognize one gentleman in the back. Are you here on a specific item, sir, or just generally interested? Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the county board not getting a recommendation, though. I mean, don't you need one coming from this body?
Is there a motion for a recommendation in another amount?
I would vote right now for 2%.
Is that a motion?
I will make it.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second for 2.0.
I would move to amend the motion for 1.6.
You accept that as a friendly amendment?
No. And let me explain. I see a doubling of the levy from 1.3 to 2.6. 2% to me might work, and I suppose when Roger runs the numbers, we'll probably find out that is very possible. And I am much more comfortable with 2% than 2.6.
I will support Bill's motion. I agree with Larry in that it is important for the county board to have a recommendation, but I honestly believe the 2.6 is unreasonable, and I'd rather have a number that we could potentially reach. Larry?
Same with me. I'm committed to raising it. I feel pretty comfortable that we could at least do 1.6. 2, I don't know until we get further budget figures, but as I understand, this is a recommendation, and that's what I did like about Roy's original comments, that try a 2% this year. I don't know if we'll be able to achieve it, but it could be a worthy goal.
All right, as we're down to the wire, any final comments? Call the roll, please.
Shore?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Motion carries with one abstention. No, one no vote. Thank you. Any additional items to come before this board?
I move adjournment.
Second.
There's a motion and second to adjourn with the notation that the next meeting will be held on Tuesday, September 8th at 8:30 a.m., barring any emergency meeting called by the executive director. Call the roll, please. Yes.
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 Roger, will we
Sure,
get
thank you.
numbers on 2%?